Great. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon for an armchair travel to Bhutan, the land of the Thunder Dragon. The small and predominantly Buddhist kingdom of Bhutan, squeezed between China and India, is tucked within the rugged Himalaya mountains and mostly covered with thick forests. Monasteries, often massive and commanding, abound, with crimson-robed monks performing century-old rituals. The country has no traffic lights, smoking is illegal, and employees must wear traditional clothing during work hours. Years ago, gross national happiness was identified by the nation as being more important than gross national product. Barry Pell recently traveled through the country, meeting its people and learning about their history and culture. Accompanied by his photography, Barry will discuss insights into a fascinating way of life that has only just begun to change after centuries of isolation. Barry is a world traveler and photojournalist who has traveled widely over 5 decades, visiting and documenting landscapes and cultures in 170 countries on all continents. He just got back from Saudi Arabia, folks. Barry currently lectures on international cultures at schools, universities, libraries, and community groups in the Boston area. And again, I want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library, along with the libraries in Andover and Dracut, for partnering with Tewksbury this morning. So all 54 of us live watching on Zoom, and those that will watch later on demand, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Barry for joining us this morning. And Barry, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And I want to underscore your thanks and appreciation to the Friends of the Tewksbury Library and also to the libraries in Andover and Dracut. And welcome to everyone who has joined me on this journey to the Kingdom of Bhutan. Bhutan is, I think, one of the world's most unique countries. I traveled there with my wife in the spring of 2019, and I will be your guide for this armchair journey. So first off, I think we'll just take a look at the map for a little bit of orientation, and that is here. So you can see from the top of the map that Bhutan, as Robert indicated, is squeezed between its much larger neighbors of China to the north and India to the south. And in their national language, Bhutan actually means, the name of the country is not Bhutan, but it's actually, the name means the land of the Thunder Dragon. And I'll explain more about that. And it is indeed the last Buddhist kingdom in the soaring and rugged Himalaya mountains. My wife and I entered the country, and you could see on the bottom of this map an enlargement of Bhutan, and it sort of has a bit of an oval shape. And we entered from India in the province of Assam in the east, and we then traveled by road from the eastern end of the country all the way across nearly its entire length, leaving Bhutan's only international airport, which is located here in the west at a town called Paro. And the capital, the largest city, is Thimphu. The H is not pronounced, Thimphu, here not far from Paro. And so we traveled along what's known as the National Road, going from the east all the way to the west, and then taking some side trips where roads were available. Now, among its more unique aspects, and let me go back here for a moment. Among its more unique aspects, Bhutan, as Robert indicated, has not one traffic light. Smoking is entirely illegal, inside and outside, and employees and students and most everyone else wear traditional clothing. And years ago, the government did identify gross national happiness, a very unique concept, as being much more important than gross national product. So in this program, what I will do based on my travels is introduce you to Bhutan's very fascinating history, its culture, its important Buddhist worship, and a way of life that has only recently begun to change after centuries of isolation. Okay, so and we can begin here. All right. Well, by many measures in this country, whether you look at the country's extraordinary landscape or its culture, its people, certainly, and perhaps above all else, its spirituality. Bhutan, I think, is one of the most extraordinary and unique places that I have had the opportunity to visit. On one hand, it is more and more a very modern country, but it is also medieval, with one foot still rooted in the past. Sustainable socioeconomic development, as well as issues like preservation and promotion of culture and tradition, so important. Also, protection of its natural environment. These are all at the heart of government policy. And so nearly every decision made by the government in Bhutan is carefully weighed for the benefit of its people through the principle of gross national happiness. And this gives, I think, Bhutan a much different look and feel from other nations. It is truly a visual and spiritual feast for visitors. It draws on the inspiration of devotional traditions which have been practiced in the country for hundreds of years and have, I think, essentially become part of the people's DNA. Well, Bhutan is also a land of gentle and hospitable people. Ancient monasteries, fluttering prayer flags, and unforgettable landscapes that give one a lasting sense, I think, of peaceful tranquility. While walking along its ancient footpaths, time seemed for us to stand still for a moment. One gets a glimpse of a country that has been shut off from the outside world during most of its history. Well, today, guided by its Buddhist principles, Bhutan is balancing modernity with tradition. In the year 2000, few people had even heard of the name of Bhutan or its existence. By 2016, it was recognized by National Geographic Traveler as one of the must-see places of the year. Well, Bhutan is nestled in the rugged Himalaya mountains of North Asia and tucked between Chinese Tibet and India. It has a land area slightly larger than the state of Maryland, so it's not a really big place. And therefore, when we were planning our trip, this sounded like a relatively small country that we would be able to see most of in a couple of weeks. That is, of course, until we spent hours crossing roads that looked like this, narrow and switchbacked into valleys and over mountain passes. Well, suddenly the land appeared gigantic. Almost the entire country is mountainous. A range of high Himalayan peaks forms much of the country's northern and western borders, and the highest soar to almost 25,000 feet. Many of these peaks are actually still virtually unexplored. Some aren't even named. 1/5 of Bhutan is under perpetual snow. And the Himalayas, a young mountain range, of course, geologically, continue to buckle and rise under the influence of plate tectonics and earthquakes. Some are quite sizable, and they have shaken the country, causing fatalities and destruction every several years. Mountaineering is actually banned on many of Bhutan's sacred peaks out of respect for the protective deities believed to reside there. Well, the population of the country is relatively low, just about 825,000, consisting predominantly of tiny settlements that look like this, small villages scattered throughout the mountains and valleys. In these villages, typically there's a single main street filled with general stores and small shops, as well as having the occasional religious building. At all of these places where we stopped to visit and take a break, we were welcomed into local cafes, very generously offered a cup of hot milk tea, or more popularly, butter tea, which tastes a little like a savory soup, and I think needs to develop a taste for over time, often prepared in simple wood stoves like this. Now, there are also about a dozen larger towns, but even those have fewer than 10,000 residents. The capital and largest city is here, Thimphu, with over 100,000 people. After traveling largely through this very uncrowded country, When we arrived at Thimphu, it felt like a very big place. Indeed, many Bhutanese have been migrating into the capital for better jobs, and that has created housing shortages and, heaven forbids, even traffic jams. Well, this is one of the city's rotaries, which, like many of their rotaries, is designed in a distinctively Bhutanese style. Well, as I mentioned, there are no traffic signals in Thimphu or in the rest of the country for that matter. Instead, local police in the city center perform eye-catching choreography with hand and body movements to direct traffic at busy intersections. It's a joy just to stand about and watch them. Located on a hillside just overlooking the city is a 169-foot tall seated Buddha statue, which is one of the world's largest, believed to bestow blessings, peace, and happiness on the entire world. The body of this Buddha itself is filled with 125,000 smaller Buddha statues inside. The capital also contains the largest produce market, shown here. 2 levels of fruits and vegetables spread everywhere of all types, and in particular, the red and eye-watering hot chilies, which are very important in the Bhutanese diet, used to prepare their national dish, which is cheese and chili. In fact, the Bhutanese eat chilies in every meal, and almost all Bhutanese dishes contain chilies in various forms. Here it's shown being prepared in the lower center of this photo. We are actually told that the Bhutanese appetite decreases dramatically when a meal does not have a sufficiently spicy kick. Well, agriculture is the country's primary occupation, and living within such a hilly and mountainous terrain, the Bhutanese have had to construct terraced fields to gain more arable land for rice, potatoes, and vegetables, nearly all grown organically. Still, the lack of sufficient farmland means that much produce is imported from India to the south. Now, also imported from India is meat, and meat is a very controversial issue in Bhutan. The government prohibits the hunting and killing of animals for consumption, but yet there are many non-vegetarian Bhutanese who eat pork and beef and chicken, even among monks. Now, you can get arrested and fined if you slaughter an animal for food, or even if you fish from the rivers, except catch and release, or even accidentally kill a stray dog, of which there are hundreds roaming the villages and towns, kindly fed and looked after by locals, of course, in keeping with Buddhist values. And of course, these animals are confident that no one will bother them. Well, while eating meat may seem to us as hypocritical to Buddhist ideals, the Bhutanese have a sort of rationalization that it is okay to eat meat if the animal was not killed on their behalf. So it is largely killed outside the country and imported into Bhutan. Now, cows are respected and encountered grazing and walking along roads throughout the country. At the higher elevations, though, above 10,000 feet, the animal you will encounter, which this area above 10,000 feet encompasses about 1/3 of the country, the animal you encounter are these yaks, herded by the country's nomadic people. And they're especially prized for their butter-fat-rich milk, which is used to make butter and cheese. But all parts of the animal serve some function. The yak hair is used for garments and tents, and above the tree line, yak dung is the only source of fuel to burn for heat and cooking. Although these animals are massive and somewhat clumsy looking, they can move very quickly and have impressively sharp horns, and we were cautioned to give them a wide berth. Now, foreign tourism did not begin in Bhutan until recently, 1974. It was done both to raise revenue and to promote the Bhutanese unique culture and traditions to the outside world. But Bhutan was very concerned about the potential negative impacts of tourism on their country. And so to protect the environment and prevent an onslaught of foreign cultural intrusion, tourism is highly regulated. It requires a prepaid organized itinerary through a registered Bhutanese tour company. And to deter any of the low-cost backpacker tourism, there's a minimum expenditure requirement of some $200 to $300 per person daily. Now, although the cost is relatively steep, especially if you choose a private rather than a group tour, as my wife and I did, this cost contains essentially everything. 3-star accommodations in places that look like this, traditionally constructed and decorated. This is the interior of our hotel. It includes all food, transportation, a guide, a driver, entry fees, permit, and visa. And our tailored all-inclusive itinerary also included a vehicle pickup in Assam, India, and an exit flight to Delhi. So as I mentioned in the introduction, most tourists visit the more developed western half of Bhutan, where the only international airport actually has a single runway. And because of the mountains and the need for some length of this runway, the runway actually is squeezed between steep peaks on either end. So it's a bit hair-raising, both landing and taking off. We, however, because we wanted to see more of the country, especially the less developed eastern half, we entered from India on the east and traveled entirely across the country all the way to the west and the airport at Paro. By the way, there are 3 land border crossing points between India and Bhutan, but crossing from China is prohibited. Well, crowded and frenetic India was certainly a sharp contrast to our smooth and peaceful entry into Bhutan. And we were met by our guide, his name is Sonam, shown here in the sunglasses on the left, and our driver, Dasho. Both were elegantly attired in long regulation GO, that's G-H-O, robes, belted tightly around the waist, and with starched white cuffs and knee-high black socks and leather dress shoes. This impressed us immediately as this national dress. There's also traditional footwear, the knee-high embroidered boots, some quite artistically elaborate like this, but generally some of the more elaborate ones are now worn only during special events and festivals. Women also have a national dress. It's called a kira, K-I-R-A. It is a floor-length rectangular cloth wrapped around the body. And it's made from cotton or silk for more festive occasions. They also make these brocade dresses, which are hand-spun and hand-woven, embroidered with various colors and designs in raw silk. Famous for their intricate designs and patterns, a fine textile like this can take up to a year to complete. So Bhutan's traditional dress certainly was one of the most distinctive and visible aspects of our visit to the country. Wearing national attire is compulsory for public employees as well as for school children. Many Bhutanese, though, we observed, are proud of this dress outfit, and they wear their everyday gos and kiras whenever they leave the house. The clothing is made in a variety of traditional and elegant patterns, often on handmade hand looms. And the finished material for the men's gos and the women's kiras is displayed. This is one of those hand looms, is displayed for sale in a shop in the capital, shown here. So Bhutanese people, when they go out to visit any religious or government office, are also required to wear this traditional costume. The country has a very detailed, involved system of etiquette, which was established centuries ago. And that system specifies how to dress when visiting a monastery, the polite way to greet one's boss and officials, as well as proper means of sitting and eating and other behaviors. For example, when visiting a monastery, both men and women are required to wear a sash, as these women are, over their shoulder, put on correctly and worn in just the right way. And these sashes help to identify a person's rank. So the sash of ordinary citizens, like these young men, is made of unbleached white silk. For government officials, each level is identified by a different color: green, red, blue, and orange as officials rise in rank, finally up to yellow. which is worn exclusively by the king. And his picture is shown here. Well, the etiquette system is an important concept in Bhutanese Buddhist society, linked to their belief in respect for one's parents, elders, and other members of the community, and emphasizing the aesthetics of performing everyday tasks gracefully and with care and consideration for others. Well, our east to west journey across Bhutan was about 2 weeks with our English-speaking guide Sonam, who educated us in the intricacies of Buddhism, temple architecture. He told us about the economy, the unique national sports, which I'll speak about, of archery and darts, and of course, Bhutan's policy to achieve gross national happiness. Of course, at times, he was also invaluable in assisting us along some challenging paths. Well, meanwhile, somewhat less English-speaking driver Dasho had perhaps the more challenging responsibility, as he had to maneuver us safely on paved and unpaved, sometimes bone-jarring, 2-lane roads. Many of the roads in Bhutan are still under construction. It is a country where getting anywhere is either up or down. In fact, the only straight road in Bhutan runs less than a half mile, giving it noteworthy mention in guidebooks. Long, narrow, winding roads with a sheer rock face on one side and a vertical drop on the other are characteristic of most Bhutanese highways. Well, with his eyes focused on the twisting roads and watching out for cows, yaks, and the colorfully painted cargo trucks from India recklessly barreling around hairpin turns in the opposite direction, our driver somehow was also able, with good peripheral vision, to grind to a halt and point out a family of gray lango monkeys swinging through the forest on the roadside. By the way, with the exception of the royal family, there are no family names in the country. Instead, 2 names are given to children by Buddhist monks a few weeks after birth. And these are traditional names of Tibetan origin. They're chosen because of some auspicious influence or religious meaning. So for example, our guide's name, which is Sonam, means gifted or fortunate one. It's usually impossible to tell the gender of a Bhutanese child based on their name, since most names may apply to either gender. The official language of the country is Dzongkha. It uses the same script as neighboring Tibet, as shown here at the top of this picture, but it is sufficiently different that Tibetans cannot understand it. English, though, is the medium of instruction in schools, so most educated people can speak it fluently. There are English signs and books and menus throughout the country, and road signs and government documents are also all written in both English and Dzongkha. In their language, Dzongkha, the country is not called Bhutan, it is called Druk Yul, which means land of the thunder dragon. And it was so named because of the violent and large thunderstorms that whipped down the Himalayas through the country's valleys. The sparkling of thunderbolts was believed to be the fire of a dragon, and Bhutan's distinctive national flag, shown here, thereby portrays a fierce dragon at its center. Well, Bhutan, of course, is a landlocked country. For centuries, it was a secluded land dominated by subsistence agriculture. There was a limited education, medical facilities, a very low life expectancy, only in the 30s. It was certainly no Shangri-La. Bhutan's early history is steeped in mythology. It remains obscure. Buddhism, which originated in north-central India around the 5th century BCE, was brought to Bhutan from Tibet in the 8th century. And the actual name Bhutan derives from a Tibetan place name. It means the end of Tibet, logically, a reference to the country's position at the southern extremity of the Tibetan plateau and culture. Well, since the adoption of Buddhism, the country's political history has been nearly inseparable from its religious history and relations among the various monastic schools and monasteries throughout the country. In earlier times, there was great competition and warfare between rival religious schools fighting for dominance, until finally a Buddhist priest, regarded as the founder of Bhutan, was able to consolidate the country in the early 1600s. Bhutan has the distinction, our guide proudly told us, of being independent throughout its history, continuously and successfully defending its sovereignty and never having been conquered or occupied by an outside power. A kingdom was established in the early 1900s, and it is the fifth king in the hereditary line that has ruled since 2006. Bhutan is today a constitutional monarchy with a parliament and public elections, but the king remains as the nation's guiding leader, and pictures of him and his family are prominent everywhere, such as above this doorway to the shop. Homes, hotels, and public spaces as well. But it seemed to us this was done more out of respect and admiration, even love, frankly, for the royal family and the country's accomplishments than out of obligation or fear or some cult of personality. Indeed, the country has made incredible achievements under the present king in roads, medicine, education, national airlines, the internet, and media, to name a few. There are 4 major rivers in the country, and snowmelt from the mountains produces fresh water that is never a problem. The country has invested in developing its hydroelectric power as a renewable resource. And by the way, the present king, born, and this is one of those rivers, the present king was born in 1980. He was educated at Phillips Academy in Andover, as well as at the University of Oxford in England. Well, in addition to helping the country to progress, life expectancy has now nearly doubled to some 71 years. And underlying this progress has been the philosophy of gross national happiness, formalized in the country's constitution in 2008. Now, in the West, of course, our concept of happiness usually focuses on the individual. Bhutan's centers on the collective for people and society, emphasizing harmony with nature and traditional values. And of course, there are some measures of GNH that have been set up by the country, including good government, preservation and promotion of its culture, protection of its environment, sustainable and equitable development for its people. There is a Gross National Happiness Commission to measure progress towards those goals. Now, the Constitution mandates a minimum of 60% of the country's land area be forever preserved as undeveloped forest. It is actually currently over 70%, which enables its trees and forests to absorb 3 to 4 times more carbon emissions than its people produce. Bhutan was the world's first carbon negative country. I think there are now a couple of others. Now, this is, of course, not a program about Buddhism, but the religion and spirituality of the Bhutanese people is such an intrinsic part of their beliefs and their actions and objects in architecture. I think it is useful to describe a few aspects of the unique Bhutanese school of Buddhism practiced in their country. The lives of Bhutanese people, whether in their treatment of others or their respect for the environment, or even the care with which they weave their traditional clothing, are closely intertwined with their Buddhist religion, which is a school known as Vajrayana Buddhism. It is heavily focused on the worship of deities, the accumulation of merit in behavior and actions, and the concept of karma from past lives. So Buddhism is the country's official religion. It is taught in schools, and Buddhist families will often decorate an altar room in their home for daily prayer. Sons, and to some degree less daughters, enter monasteries to study to become monks or nuns for a period of months, or sometimes devoting their entire life. With shaven heads and loose-fitting crimson robes, the male and female monks, shown here, are nearly indistinguishable from each other. Now, as Buddhism spread around the world, many different sects or schools evolved, in part adapting to local conditions and absorbing local beliefs. Well, permeating the Bhutanese school of Buddhism are teachings of religious beliefs and practices that are focused on compassion. The collection of teachings in Buddhism in Bhutan are known as Tantra. And a deep understanding of these teachings is cultivated through reflection and meditation. The Bhutanese, like other Buddhists, believe that life is a countless series of rebirths until enlightenment is achieved. And the quality of each of those rebirths is based on your actions in the current life. So it's important during one's lifetime to act in ways that are worthy and that accumulate merit. It's believed that wholesome actions for the benefit of living things in this lifetime will favor your karma, that is, your fate or destiny in the next life. Well, as I mentioned, the religious and the secular are closely allied in Bhutan. Monasteries like this, called zangs, are physically divided into one half that is a government-supported religious authority, and then a secular administrative side. Traditionally, Bhutanese families would send one son to join a monastery, and this was viewed as a way to create merit for the family and household, as well as a blessing for the child. In more recent times, many parents who can't afford to feed their families or pay for the uniforms and textbooks required by government schools may send a child to become a monk. Officially, monasteries can only take children of 7 years of age and older, but in reality, we observe many taking children as young as 5 when they have nowhere else to go. The monastery will provide education for them, largely in knowledge and understanding of a range of Buddhist texts, teachings, and rituals. They provide accommodation, food, and clothing. And today there are over 12,000 monks and nuns in monasteries and monastic schools throughout Bhutan. Well, as we traveled, we quickly learned that in Bhutanese Buddhism, everything is symbolic and purposeful. It might represent an historic event, a religious legend, a ritual, or a means to enlightenment. There are ritual objects, many of them, used to bring Buddhism to the people. They include such things as prayer bells, representing a call to serenity or a start of prayers. There are drums, there are conch shells like these, indicating Buddhism's omnipresence. Long telescoping horns are played during and after prayer services. Temples are themselves decorated with colorful hanging paintings called thankas, made of cotton or silk, usually depicting a Buddhist deity, a scene, or a universal mandala symbol. The main assembly hall inside of temples, some of which are enormous, contain an altar with statues of historical figures or protective deities, and an abundance of sacred objects scattered around. There are holy rocks, holy water, maybe even a pair of dice to divine the future. The altars are strewn with money and gifts offered by devotees who come to pray and receive blessings by resident monks. And elsewhere in the hall are stored libraries of traditional texts and prayer books, usually wrapped in cloth. The entryways are covered with murals. I might also mention that in contrast to neighboring Tibet, Bhutan prohibits photography of objects and ceremonies within the temples. Their reasoning is that photographers often discard, or now with digital photography, delete photos, and this action is considered disrespectful to the sacred Buddhist objects. Only occasionally did I receive permission from the attendant to take a single photo of wall decorations or a prayer book. Thus, many of my photos of Buddhist thangka wall hangings or artwork or religious articles were instead taken in shops, which offered these objects for sale. Another important object in Bhutanese Buddhism is butter lamps. Butter lamps in the past burned yak butter, but now burn less flammable and, I would say, less pungent vegetable oil. They're used as ritual items in most Bhutanese temples and in their private household altars. The offering of light in golden cups represents the illumination of wisdom. And in old age, many Bhutanese citizens choose to retire to a temple where they offer voluntary services. And lighting 1,000 butter lamps on auspicious occasions is one of those services. Another object seen everywhere are spinning prayer wheels. The revolving cylinders are filled with printed prayers and engraved in tin, or in the older ones, wood on their surface. They may be as small as a foot tall, or they may be as high as 8 or 10 feet, with massive diameters requiring a strong pull. Rows of wheels are typically inset along all outside walls of a temple, and often in elegantly carved and painted wood enclosures like these. Some of these prayer wheels are driven by streams of diverted water in elegant, sacred stone enclosures. And so the religious practice is for devotees to walk and spin the wheels, never missing one, always spinning them in a clockwise direction while reciting prayers or mantras. We observe that some of the groups of prayer wheels also served a role as centers where the elderly would come, sort of senior centers, to socialize during the daytime. Our guide took us to many of them and always took time to walk around and spin the sets of wheels we encountered. And of course, we followed suit, not wanting to miss an opportunity to gain merit or simply good luck for our onward travels. Now, a characteristic sight in Buddhist countries, which we also frequently observe traveling in Bhutan, are these prayer flags, fluttering on mountain passes, rooftops, and monastery and temple courtyards. These flags come in 5 colors: blue, green, red, yellow, and white, which respectively represent the elements of earth, water, wood, fire, earth, and iron. The prayer for the flags is carved into wooden blocks and then printed on the cloth in repeating patterns. We also pass strings of white prayer flags in batches of 108, which is an auspicious number in Buddhism. They're erected on behalf of a deceased person, perhaps someone who died in a road accident. Adding an aspect of pageantry and ceremony to the landscape, the prayer flags are usually placed at strategic high points overlooking a valley from which a river can be seen. And in this way, the Bhutanese believe that the prayers they recite will waft with the wind to the river and then be carried by the river on its long and winding journey. Now, one of the curious practices of Bhutanese Buddhism is the age-old tradition of worshiping the most intriguing of objects, and that is the phallus. While this custom may at first blush seem contrary to religious spirituality, irreverent, and even perhaps a bit outrageous, at least in terms of its souvenir marketing, in the town of Punakha, where it is in vogue, it is in fact very serious about the relevance of penis worship as a means of enhancing fertility. The penis fascination has a strong historic and symbolic spiritual significance in Bhutan. It dates back to the 15th century when an eccentric and maverick Tibetan Lama, nicknamed the Divine Madman, traveled around Bhutan engaging in obscene actions and sexual antics with the deliberate intention of provoking people to discard orthodox norms and question the establishment. Well, in modern times, the temple he built, shown here at the top of the Punakha village, has become a shrine where many newly married and childless couples come from all over the world to seek blessings from an ancient wooden phallus totem. There's even a picture book inside the temple with testimonials by people who came to this temple some 9 months before and now have sent in pictures of their newborn infants. While this Buddhist teacher wasn't widely accepted during his time because of his outrageous ways, today he is one of Bhutan's favorite saints. The locals continue to paint the phallus outside their homes to ward off evil spirits and to invoke the fertility gods. So our time in Bhutan was filled with so much: stunningly picturesque monasteries and museums, Buddhist temples perched on mountainsides, religious monuments called chortens, fruit and vegetable markets, textile weavers, archery and darts competitions, and costumed folklore, music, and dance performances, while we traveled through breathtaking snow-capped mountain and terraced agricultural field valley scenery. Now, we visited during the spring month of April, when the valleys come alive with flowers, particularly deep red and pink rhododendron. And what made our trip particularly memorable, I think, was the gracious friendliness and care we received from both our guide and driver, who were attentive to our every need and request. A little bit about Bhutanese architecture, both religious and secular, arguably the most striking feature of the country. There are these massive monasteries called dzongs, which also had been built as protective forts when the various monastic orders fought each other. There are remote hilltop gombas, smaller monasteries where monks retreat to find peace and solitude. There are lakhans, yet smaller places, as well as traditional secular homes. All of them, these buildings are constructed in a very distinctive Bhutanese style and decoration, the requirements set by the government. The dzongs and the smaller Gomba monastery also include rows of dormitory residents like these for monks. And in the larger monasteries, the number of resident monks may exceed some 200. Well, up until the 20th century, these monasteries, the dzongs, of which there is one today for each of Bhutan's 20 districts, also served a major role of fortresses during the time when there were feuds and battles with neighboring districts. And as a result, like this one, they were built to look like fortresses. They had thick walls of stone or rounded mud and narrow entryways to thwart attackers. Many were accessed by cantilevered bridges, like this one shown here, as an additional protective measures. Today, the two wings are divided by their functions, as I said, one for temples and monks' quarters, the other for government offices. The dzongs are built with a considerable amount of timber, including massive beams and wooden shingle roofs. Well, this, combined with the large number of butter lamps used in the temples, have caused fires over the centuries in almost all of these buildings. Secular houses are also quite large, constructed again according to traditional government required designs. There are regulations pertaining to frontage color, window shape, decorative features, and roof slope. Materials used depend on the part of the country you're in. So, for example, there might be bamboo, stone, and wood. In the higher elevations, firewood is stacked high and wide in preparation for the freezing coming winter. Another distinctive structure found throughout the countryside is this, called a chorten. Chortens, which are called stupas in India, we found them at crossroads, near or within religious sites, where they're often placed in rows and even on high mountain passes. And they also vary in size. Some can be about 6 feet. Some of them are as high as 35 feet in height. Serene and peaceful, chortens are religious monuments for worship and offering. They were originally built to house relics of the Buddha. They now may contain sacred texts or relics, and sometimes even mummified bodies. Like all Bhutanese architecture, chortens are also built in a precise and meaningful way. All symbolic elements, including a square base symbolizing the earth, a dome representing water, and a pinnacle symbolizing enlightenment. And whenever our driver approached a roadside chorten, he always made sure to detour around it in a respectful clockwise direction. There's also a national chorten, a tall one, white with a golden spire, which is a memorial to Bhutan's third king. It's located in the capital, Thimphu, and it's visited throughout every day by worshipers who circumambulate clockwise, of course, with many simultaneously spinning their handheld, smaller prayer wheels. Some of the devotees also perform prostrations with additional prayers after they've made their circling of the chorten. Now, there are dozens of Buddhist religious festivals called sechus, which occur in towns and villages throughout the year. With 3 or 4 festivals every month, visitors have a good chance of attending one, no matter when they come to Bhutan. The 3-day celebration we attended began with an elaborate procession of villagers and religious leaders and musicians accompanying the regional lama to the local temple, while residents stationed along the road prayed to a sacred statue being carried to the monastery. Well, once inside the monastery courtyard, a masked dancer performed an elaborate ceremony. Monks and visitors alike were then invited inside the temple for a traditional service, no photography there, during which it is customary to offer a handful of rice and a cup of butter tea to attendees. And afterwards, dancers whirled and leapt around the courtyard, reenacting spiritual events from the past. The dancers are accompanied by a group of musicians playing traditional instruments. And one thing that certainly we noticed is that these festivals are not only for tourists, but they're also a great draw and appreciated by locals alike. A little bit about sports. The national sport of Bhutan is archery, but I must say it is nothing like we are familiar with in the West. Archery contests are not only sport and popular entertainment, but not unexpectedly, they serve as an affirmation of Bhutanese cultural identity. When we arrived at the archery grounds, we couldn't even see the target, which is only about a foot wide and amazingly was some 475 feet distant. We could hardly make out the arrows as they streak through the air. Players stand, well, dangerously close to the tiny target and call out how good or bad their opponent is. Taunting and harassing one's opponents is part of the game. The sport is played in teams, the scoring is complex, but particularly entertaining if a contestant manages to hit the target. His teammates, dressed in traditional Bhutanese robed and white cuffed outfits, will then gather to perform a slow, synchronized dance and sing his praises. Well, with similar rules and charming rituals, the game of darts is also very popular. Our guide, well, he found it hilarious that in Western countries, people play darts in bars at a distance of less than 6 feet to the target. Well, Bhutanese hurl these homemade wooden darts, which have a sharp metal point and can weigh up to 2/3 of a pound each. They hurl them not 6 feet, but 66 feet at a target that has a width of less than 6 inches. I would not have believed this if I didn't personally witness the competition. Once again, teammates stand perilously close to the small target, quickly jumping out of the way of errant darts, of which there are many. But successful hits are again celebrated with dancing, shouting, and arm waving. Well, finally, while Bhutan's architecture, its villages and festivals are the country's main attractions, many visitors will also include a trek in their trip into the more untouched Himalayan wilderness. They require additional time and cost. We did not do this. However, nearly all tourists climb to a monastery, Taksang Gomba, translated as Tiger's Nest Monastery. It's said, by the way, that Guru Rinpoche, Bhutan's most important religious figure who brought Buddhism to Bhutan in the 8th century, it's said that he flew to the site of the monastery on the back of a tigress to subdue the local demon. He's honored with statues in every temple, as well as this likeness behind protective glass painted on the side of a mountain. Arguably, Tiger's Nest Monastery is the most photogenic site in the country. It appears to cling to the side of a sheer vertical cliff. Now, Buddhism in Bhutan is filled with fascinating religious mythology, and legend has it that this building is anchored to the cliff by the hairs of a celestial being. Well, the route to the monastery is not easy. It climbs some 1,700 feet over sometimes steep, rocky terrain, and up and down uneven stone stairways. There is a tea house at the halfway point to refresh. The path is moderately difficult, but certainly made more challenging by the elevation, since it is located over 10,000 feet. Consequently, most visitors leave the climb to their last day, giving our lungs time to acclimate to the thinner air. We were certainly rewarded after our climb with a relaxing soak in a traditional wooden tub, the water heated by large stones taken from a fire pit. Dinner at the adjoining farmhouse was served by the family in the typical manner of rural Bhutan, that is, seated on the floor. Well, it was apparent to us that the Bhutanese have strong family bonds and adhere to cultural and religious traditions. Visiting from the more turbulent West, it certainly was immensely appealing to immerse ourselves in a peaceful and safe country where homelessness and street beggars do not exist. Plastic bags are entirely banned. Crime is minimal. Capital punishment is prohibited. Smoking and tobacco products are illegal. locals seemed genuinely pleased to make a good impression. Social interactions are conducted with kindness and grace, and of course, there is care and respect for the environment. Indeed, there's respect for all living things in Bhutan, as we observed our guide carefully avoiding killing insects or flies, due in part to the country's Buddhist ideals, perhaps due to the country's low population. Bhutan has achieved, I believe, something unique in its humanity and humility. While Bhutan welcomes foreigners to live and work in their country, they cannot become citizens. Marriage between foreigners and Bhutanese, although not illegal, is highly discouraged. Now, from our liberal Westerners' viewpoint, it's easy, I suppose, to judge this exclusionary nationalist policy as extreme and discriminatory. However, the country's regulations are intended not to discriminate, but to preserve their society's very special culture and its beliefs, rituals, and way of life. Yet, with the benefits of modernization, with increased tourism exposing its people to foreign ways and values, it is inevitable that change has been steadily occurring. Television and internet were banned in the country until 1999. Bhutan was the last country in the world to get television. Foreign visitors have increased from a mere 300 in 1974 to more than 250,000 in 2017. Many Bhutanese have been abandoning their villages for the greater excitement and employment opportunities in the capital, Thimphu. For some, at least outside of rural Bhutan, happiness is increasingly being defined by consumerism. But for now, although Bhutan's people will certainly continue to practice, debate, and legislate happiness, it seemed to me that the fundamental Bhutanese way of life is secure. Thank you very much.
So Barry, thank you. Wonderful job as expected. So folks, let's take 10 minutes of questions or so. So if you have a question for Barry, please get it into the Q&A and we'll start addressing them. Towards the beginning of your presentation, Linda pointed out that King Jigme attended Cushing Academy here in Massachusetts back in the 1990s. Okay.
Actually, the king, are you speaking of the king?
I believe that's who she's referring to, and
Yeah,
I'm sure
no,
I mispronounced that.
The king actually attended Phillips Academy in Andover.
Oh, okay. There you go. You're good fact check there, Barry. Gail says, great tour. Thank you very much, Barry. Let's see. Osmana said, love your presentation. Is there a dam on the lake?
Yeah, they have built, in order to harness their hydroelectric power, they have built several dams throughout the country because that's a renewable energy, which they are favoring quite heavily for their energy needs.
Angela asks, do they use iPhones? Do they have smartphones?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Modernization has inevitably come to Bhutan. They certainly use iPhones these days.
Betsy asks, what is the role of women in Bhutan culture? How are girls raised?
Yeah, so there's a great deal of equality in their society, in their culture, in their religion, whereby girls are, we spoke with many women and girls who are being educated to high levels. They enter all the professions. We found there's a great deal of equality between the genders.
All right, so last call for questions, folks. There were 60 of you on the call and we had 2 questions. We can do better. Let's try for a couple more. Carolyn asks, when in the rural areas did you say it, or maybe where did you say if there was, where did you stay if there was no hotel in the rural areas? I see.
Yeah, so yeah, there were accommodations that were provided in the rural areas. There were somewhat not quite as modern, but they still, you know, the government has established, because people are now traveling extensively through the country, and so the government has established these inns. Which are built in traditional ways. So there are places, and usually we wouldn't stay in a remote area. We would be in some kind of a larger town, perhaps 10,000 people or so, so that and these towns are spaced so that they are within a day's drive of each other. So the country is very well set up now for tourism, where people can stay in traditional accommodations.
And then Linda also mentioned that Jigme did attend Cushing Academy because her son taught him there. So perhaps he went to both schools.
Maybe he did.
There you go. Linda said, another Linda said, could you please tell us more about the education levels?
Yeah, so they're on a par with the British system, and they go through university. University is provided generally free, and also there are lots of scholarships for people to study abroad. So education is favored greatly, both for boys and girls. So their education system is quite elaborate, and I would say certainly on a par, at least for general education, if not for some specialties, is on a par with Western education at this point.
Let's see, how often were the flights in case you missed one?
They were, as I recall, they were typically every day. At least they had one flight every day, which would go, and there are flights to different places, of course, to get into and out of the country. The flight that we took was between Bhutan and Delhi in India. Now, but you can arrange to fly directly from European cities into Bhutan directly. We wanted to spend some time in India, so we flew into Delhi first.
Okay, so that last question was from Shinwei. Angela says, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. Mariette asks, how do they get their cars? Did you see new or used car sale lots?
Oh, that's an esoteric question. I did not notice car sale lots, but a lot of their cars come across the border from India, so that's how they're brought in. I suspect I'm sure they sell cars in Bhutan, but because of the paths we took and the roads we were on, we didn't notice I didn't notice specifically any car dealerships. But I'm sure they have them. There are very many modern vehicles now traversing the roads of the country.
Angela asks, do they import from the United States or mostly from India?
Well, they import mostly from India, but I think a lot of the vehicles are American brands or Asian brands. I mean, there's lots of Toyotas. There are Fords and GMC vehicles, which may be built, probably are built in India and then exported into Bhutan.
And the last but not, well, actually, look at this, all these questions. Betsy asks, are any companies from other countries located in Bhutan?
Companies from other countries. You mean like?
Is there a McDonald's, Barry?
There are no McDonald's I'm happy to say there are no McDonald's in Bhutan. There are no Starbucks in Bhutan. No, they very carefully control that. There may be some American corporations that are there, but in terms of traditional retail chains, there are, to my knowledge, there are none, and the government has resisted that.
Teresa says, so interesting. Thank you. Linda asks, how are the disabled and handicapped treated?
I think with great respect. There are provisions for the handicapped that I noticed on streets, handicap ramps, and as far as government policy, I'm sure with their Buddhist traditions of compassion, I'm sure that there are lots of programs to attend to handicapped people in the country. I would be shocked if I found otherwise. It's a very compassionate people, and I'm sure they support their handicapped.
Shinwei asks, did you say that names were only given by the monks?
Yes, that's right. For the people who practice Buddhism, the Bhutanese Buddhism, the names are given by monks shortly after the birth of a child.
Mary asks, besides your tour guide and driver, can you give us an idea of how the locals interacted with you? Were you able to communicate easily with local people?
Wonderfully, actually. Many of them have a Western education. We met, because it is such a small country, we met people who are in the government, and they were extremely engaging, welcoming, and wanted to share their culture with us. So yeah, we met groups of school children, for example. I showed pictures in the program who wanted very much to approach us and to speak with us. Although we had a guide, we also had time when we were on our own, and we would take walks through the villages, and we would visit some of the schools, and people would approach us, and we could have an exchange with them, and they were eager to practice their English, of course, and to share with us some of their culture, and also to ask us questions about the United States.
Kathy says, most impressive presentation. I'm ready to book my trip, even though I barely knew this country existed prior to the talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let me just mention that we worked through a travel agency in Boston that we were very, very happy with. They are on Atlantic Avenue in the North End, and they're called Audley Travel, A-U-D-L-E-Y. They're the ones who arranged everything, and we had nothing but good things to say about them. So if anyone is considering a trip there, I recommend that you start at least to check into Audley Travel, A-U-D-L-E-Y, on Washington Street.
Last question goes to Roma, who asks, what was your favorite experience there?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many. I would have to say, though, it was climbing up to the monastery on our next to last day, the Tiger's Nest Monastery. I mean, that was clearly a literal and figurative highlight of our travels. It was incredibly impressive and it also lent us a sense of accomplishment in being able to make that hike. We were concerned about it. We are older. We were concerned about being able to make it. Our guide, once again, was invaluable in helping my wife to get over some of the more precarious steps, but we were very pleased to have accomplished this hike, and the views from there, the monastery itself and the history was probably the most memorable part of our trip.
Roma says, thank you for sharing. Mariette says, wonderful program, thank you. Mary says, thank you so much. It's been a lovely presentation. Bhutan is on my lists of places to go. I'm very excited after seeing your photos. And Barbara says, wonderful to have this most interesting and great photo journal. See you again soon at Ollie, I hope. Maybe Barbara's a fan of yours, Barry.
Yes, I will be presenting at Ollie in the spring. Yes.
Oh, there we go. And speaking of future presentations, tomorrow Tewksbury will be hosting an armchair traveler presentation to the national parks of the American West. And we'll also have something next Wednesday night for Thailand. So I will provide information about those two programs in an email to all of you later today, along with a feedback survey and the recording. So Barry, we've taken 10 minutes of questions. I think you've probably answered at least a dozen questions. I appreciate that. Any last words, Barry, before we wrap up?
Well, Linda asked how long the hike took. It took about 6 hours in total to go up, and somewhat less going down. But we did have a lovely rest at a tea house at the halfway point, so that helped us recoup our energy.
All right, Barry. So Barry, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll do this again next year during our armchair travel presentation, and perhaps that'll even be in person. Who knows? Although I do like these Zooms in the winter. Although granted, it's 65 degrees out. But anyway.
I do too.
I kind of like I like Zooming during the wintertime. Anyway, so thank you so much, Barry. Thank you to Drake and Andover for partnering with Tewksbury. Thank you to the Friends of the Tewksbury Library, and we'll see you all down the road. Thanks so much.
Thank you very
Have
much.
a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Stay well.